And how do you deal with certain controversial passages? Obviously, Revelation, there's probably interpretation for every person who's read it.
Right.
Do you come down on a specific stance and say, this is going to be an all-millennial study Bible, or how do you do that?
It's a good question. One of the things, if anybody's listening to this and they have that same sort of question, say about Revelation, I don't think anybody beforehand who's worked in a study Bible has put out as much information and samples as we have. And one of the reasons for that is just, certain publishers think you don't want to put out too much or people aren't going to buy it, but when you're talking about something with 2,700 pages, I don't think that's too big of a worry. So somebody could go on to ESVStudyBible.org and see, for example, our introduction to the book of Revelation, which I think our author did a really, really nice job of having a number of charts that show, if it's read this way, this is how the structure looks. And here's how this viewpoint would understand the millennium. Here's when Christ would return in relation to the tribulation. So it tries to have a real even-handed approach on those sort of issues that there really is no evangelical consensus. Some people feel very strongly about, say, amillennialism or premillennialism. And we've tried to present them in an even-handed way. And in doing so, we involved more than one scholar from more than one perspective. So that as you read different notes on a passage like Revelation 20, you can understand, okay, may not agree with position X, but these are the sort of arguments that they would use and how they would understand it, and also how this opposing view would understand it. We don't do that with every single issue, but we try to have an even-handed approach on especially controversial subjects.
And so you have not just an introduction to the book and not just the comments underneath the passages, but you also have essays throughout the book that speak to different issues.
Right.
So what are some of those and how do those fit in?
Yeah, I think that's going to be one of the more intriguing and helpful things for people is there are over 50 essays, and they're all gathered at the back of the Bible. So it's kind of a distinct section. Old Testament canon, New Testament canon. How did the church, quote unquote, decide which books are going to be in the canon, or is that even the right question to ask? What about this? They translated the Old Testament Hebrew into Greek, the Septuagint. How did that come about? Who did that? Why is that important for us? So an essay on that. How do we know the Old Testament manuscripts are reliable or New Testament manuscripts are reliable? Archaeology. What are some of the archaeological discoveries and how do those play in? We've got one Old Testament archaeology, New Testament archaeology. There's about 15 articles overviewing theology, just giving an overview of God and man and Christ and the church and the end times. Something that most study Bibles don't include, but we thought was important just because of the state of the church today, an overview of ethics articles. So an article on really difficult hot button issues like abortion and marriage and sexuality and divorce and bioethics and end of life issues, homosexuality. And I think one of the values of this is I have a pretty good access both to print books on various subjects and of course online. But if I wanted something in 1,800 words that gave an overview of homosexuality, it's very easy to find big books on it. It's easy to find internet articles and you don't really know the source or how reliable they are. But those sort of essays in the back in a kind of concise way, I think really pack a lot of information. And also we've got this one online, but how to read the Bible for personal application, how to read it prayerfully in communion with God, and how to read it theologically, how to read the Bible as literature, how to use the Bible in prayer, in public worship and preaching. What are some of the basic methods of interpreting the Bible. All of those represent different essays that are in the back. So I'm hoping, we hope that in a sense this becomes kind of a one-stop shop for people. It's not the final destination, it's not the only book you'll ever need, but if you were to break all of this out into kind of normal size print and not on Bible paper, it'd be equivalent to like 20, 25 volumes on your shelf. And to have that in one resource, I think, is going to be tremendously valuable. And we do pray that the Lord would make a way to get the ESV Study Bible, into the hands of the majority world, third world churches and pastors, many of whom don't have more than one book on their shelf. So if anybody listening out there, if you join us in praying that pastors around the world would have access to something like this, that would be
and that's
wonderful reality.
Crossway's a nonprofit, so donations could be made to advance that.
Right, donations could be made, and a portion of each Bible that's sold is going to go towards trying to advance that mission. But I think with a lot of things, there's people with money out there, and there's people who can pray, and there's people who can think of strategic, creative ways to make things happen. And what it requires, I think, is somebody thinking through some strategies in a prayerful way, depending upon God's Spirit. But I think some pretty exciting things could happen in the future with this.